Hey guys, it's Allison here, and I am jumping right in with some more cards from my February Simon Says Stamp Card Kit. So I just basically left everything on my desk as it was after I finished filming the last few cards and just turned my camera back on and kept going. So I've decided to use this camera print paper, and I really wanted to have it be the full background, but I accidentally cut it too short. So after, jumping around and cursing a tiny bit, I just figured I got to roll with it, and I picked that dark brown pattern, or dark brown paper to go behind it. It's actually the back of the camera print, as you saw there. And I really like the way it sort of makes the colors in that camera print pop. And I figured this is also a really good opportunity to bring in one of those wood veneer cameras, but it gets a little bit lost on the background. All those cameras, you just can't see the wood veneer, so it needs something behind it. And rather than cut a square, which would be really easy to do, I decide to go with a circle and add a different shape. And I even thought that it would be kind of fun to layer it, the hot pink and the orange. And I really like it, but as I am placing this all on that camera print pattern and everything, it's starting to feel a little busy. But I go ahead and I make my 3 different sized circles of both the pink and the orange. And it's at this point that I decide that I like this idea, but it's not the right idea for this particular background, and I need a more solid color. So I cut a piece of the gray cardstock that was from the kit, and I'm cutting it to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, so that when it goes on my card base, I will get that nice white border that I like. And I'm using the embossing folder from the kit, the one that has all the sort of polka dots on it. So I'm just going to put my adhesive on the back, and I do add extra adhesive in the middle. I just find that when I'm using a piece of cardstock that's been embossed, having that extra little bit of adhesive keeps everything secure. Sometimes it doesn't grip so well because of all the sort of gaps, I guess, in the paper. So I don't know if you noticed, but I punched 3 of those hot pink circles. But there's only 2 on my desk right now, and that is because when I moved my Big Shot off my desk after embossing the gray cardstock, one of the circles went with it, but I didn't notice it at the time. So now I am putting this together, and this is when I realized that I'm missing a circle. So I sort of look everywhere, don't see it, and decide that I must be losing my mind, and I didn't actually punch 3 circles. So I just roll with it because, I'm of the age where I probably am losing my mind. So I just keep going with the card, and I adhere my camera down, and it needs a sentiment. So I think of using some of the patterned papers and maybe even stamping on the back of one of the patterned papers. But it's not really the right look for what I'm going for. So I just pull out a scrap of white cardstock that I'd had on the desk, and a stamp from another card kit. This is my happy birthday stamp. And I think of just kind of playing up that hot pink, and I'm going to use a red ink called, good question, Raspberry Ripple, I believe. And I'm using my mini Misty because I know that my ink is not super juicy, and I want to have a really crisp, clean image. So I need to be able to stamp it multiple times and get it cleanly stamped multiple times. So pulled in my Misty for that. And I was going to add this other stamp. There is a round circular stamp in the kit that has the image of an envelope on it. And I figure, because I've lost this other circle, that I can replace it with another stamped image, and that's one way of bringing the stamp set onto this card. And now I'm just looking for the right size circle to punch this out. I'm not sure if any of my punches are the right size, so I'm looking in my dies, and they're not the right size. But I do have a punch. But of course, I have managed to stamp that image in a spot on the paper that is not accessible to a punch, because, you know, I'm smart that way. Anyways, it's not the same color as the pattern paper that I have on there, but I think it works, and it definitely imitates the circle pattern. So now I'm cutting out the happy birthday sentiment, and I had initially cut it into a rectangle, as you saw, and it just didn't, I don't know, it was just big and blocky, and I didn't like it. So I decided to cut out the image, and I don't know if I'm completely happy with it, but it's a lot better. And then I just used the liquid glue to glue it down, make sure that it was completely adhered. Once again, because the embossing folder just tends to make things a little trickier to adhere. Okay, so now I want to add these little hearts. These are also from the stamp set, and there's a solid heart and then an outlined heart. And I had tried my gray ink because I wanted to pick up the gray cardstock, but it was like barely noticeable. It is so dry. I need to re-ink it badly. So then I just pulled out my black, which is also really dry, so it comes across as gray, which is, you know, that works. And then because I'm working with circles here, instead of fussy cutting the hearts as hearts, I punched them with a tiny hole punch to be little circles. So I'm just going to glue those down. And I decided that they need a little shine. So I am adding some glossy accents to this. And I had to stick my bottle. And then it needs more shine. So I'm dotting around some of my matte medium, and I'm going to add some of the little jewels. And I'm not adding any of the pink ones, I'm just adding the clear ones. So it's actually really subtle on the finished card, but I think the pink ones would have been the wrong look. This way it looks more like dewdrops, I guess. It sort of mimics the glossy accents. In fact, I probably could have just used drops of glossy accents instead of hassling with all these little gems, but I didn't think of that at the time. Okay, so that is that card done, and I'm going back to this card that I had already started, and I still have one more camera wood veneer, so I want to get that on there, but I do need a block of paper that I can stamp on for my sentiment, basically. So I'm entertaining a few different colors, and I decide on this lovely teal color. And I have put two stamps together, the You Make Everything Colorful and the Thanks stamp, and that is going to be my sentiment. So I've adhered the camera on, and I didn't trim the paper until I had the camera on there because I wasn't totally sure how much I needed to trim it. So I waited until I had the camera glued on, and then I trimmed my paper, and I tried to be as straight as I possibly could with my scissors. And then the last step is to add some gold mist. Okay, and then on to my next card. And I'm just looking through my papers to see which one I want to use, and I decide to go with this one that has all the sort of tape measures on it. I am trying very hard to embrace all the crafty papers and not just scrap with their B-sides, so I figure I will go with this one and see what happens. And I'm going to start with a very similar card design as my camera one, where I have a long strip of a solid color and then this large block, but it doesn't fill the entire card of the pattern paper. So put my pink strip down first, and then this measuring tape paper over top. Now I just got to figure out everything else that's going on there, and I know I want to have several sort of smaller bits of paper kind of stacked and layered. And I start with that turquoise color, and that's going to be my base, and then I can start layering everything on top of that, and I figure I can pull in that floral pattern and some hot pink. And then I decide that it would be a really good idea to maybe add some watercolor to this. And sitting on my desk is a couple of pads of the Distress Oxide inks. And this pink one is almost the same color as the background, the pink strip of paper in the background. So I tested it out on a tiny strip just to see what it would look like, and it seems to work. So I drip it on there, but I'm very conscious of the fact that I've already got this stuck down to my card base, and I don't want it to soak all the way through. So I'm drying it in between, and then I added some more of the oxide ink with a dry paintbrush, dried it again, and then it still wasn't dark enough, so I added some of the red paint that came with the kit and just kind of painted a circle on there. And now I've put that aside to dry, and while that is drying I will work on the other sort of papers that I'm going to be stacking. And I want to also use the little wood veneer dressmaker's dummy. So I know, I sort of have this idea in my head of what I want this all to look like, sort of very stacked and layered, but it just takes a little time for it to come together. So I'm just pulling out some papers, and I stamped the You Make Everything Colorful sentiment onto that hot pink, and I figure I will pop that up with some dimensional adhesive. And then now my card, it's not totally dry, but I figure it's dry enough that I can start to put it together with the papers. So I am getting my layers in place. Trying to decide exactly where I want them. I don't want them to stack directly one on top of the other. I want it to be, for all of them to be slightly offset from each other. That just adds interest to your layers and makes them not look quite so planned, I guess you could say. So now I am deciding on how to accent, and I think that those two sort of globs of watercolor need a little bit of accent. So I'm taking the paint palette stamp and I'm embossing it with white embossing powder, and then I go and grab my Stampin' Up! Markers and I pull out basically the colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, and blue, and I fill in each of the sort of dots on the paint palette in rainbow order. And then I will fussy cut these and add them on to my card. They look really cute, actually. It's hard to see the embossing because it's white on white, but I really like the little rainbow dots. They are a fun accent on the card. And then I've got the paintbrush stamp, and I've just stamped it with the gray just so I know sort of where the stamp is. And then I'm going back and I'm inking up the handle of the brush with my Island Indigo, that's a dark blue, and then the tip of the brush with my Raspberry Ripple. And between the three colors of ink, it gives a really fun brush look. The gray in the middle adds a nice shading, but the blue and the red really make it pop. So that's a lot more sort of fiddly work than I would normally do on cards. I tend to try and make my cards as simple as I can, but you know, every now and then you got to embrace something a little bit more creative and just, you know, different techniques. And I had a lot of fun with this. This was cool. So now I'm just putting the paintbrushes on pop dots, and I have these tiny square foam adhesives, and I cut them in half so they are like itty bitty. And now I'm just gluing on that wood veneer dressmaker's dummy. Oh, and I did sprinkle the card with some gold mist. Okay, so next card, I'm just humming along here. And I've decided to use that cork pattern paper as my background. But I feel like it needs a little bit of texture. So I pull out the sort of mesh embossing folder. And I was just making sure that the folder was the right way up because I definitely want the cork to have the raised side. And I was worried because I heard the paper sort of cracking as I was putting it through, and I was a little worried that it would all fall apart, but it was fine. So I'm just adhering it down, making sure that I've got enough adhesive so it all stays down. And then I'm finding some papers to dress it up with, and I really want to use this beautiful floral pattern. But I don't want to cover up all that gorgeous embossing either. So I'm just cutting a large strip of that and then looking for some of my other papers that I can add to it. And I still got that, I still have one wood veneer, and it's a sewing machine. And there's this one paper that I haven't cut into yet, and it's got all these sewing images on it. So I know I want to get that on the page. And then I have another paper, in fact I think it's the back of the sewing paper, that has a bunch of buttons on it. And the three patterns work really well together, but they do need a little bit of an accent color just to sort of brighten things up. So I bring in a little strip of that hot pink again. And I notch the end just for some interest, and I figure I can glue my sewing machine onto that hot pink so that it doesn't get lost in all those lighter patterned papers. So now I'm just laying down my pieces of pattern paper. I was going to call them strips or scraps, but you understand what I mean. And now I need a sentiment for that strip. So I grabbed a different happy birthday sentiment, and I'm going to stamp that on the hot pink strip. And then on the bottom of the floral, I'm going to add one of the stamped sentiments from the kit, and it says "Crafter's Gonna Craft." And I figure that goes really well with all the sewing images and everything that's on this card. And I get my sewing machine, and I sort of realized I think it's upside down because the other side was a little bit more vibrant, but I like the orientation of it this way rather than the other way. And now to dress up the card even more, I have added tiny spots of glue to the inside of most of the flowers in the floral pattern. I'm going to skip ahead because it's quite tedious to see me glue on all these little gems. And I got my head in the way a few times. And that was the end of that card, and I'm sorry, I forgot to turn my camera on for a bit, so you missed me putting together the first half of this card, and now I've gotten to the point where I've got everything on there except an embellishment, and I decided that I wanted something like a flower, and then since I had been using buttons on previous cards, and a lot of the patterns have buttons on them, I would kind of embrace the buttons. And I am going to cover this entire piece of white cardstock that I have die cut into a flower shape with buttons. And you see my little button stash right there. And I've just gone through and pulled out mostly pink, but there's a couple of turquoisey ones in there because there's turquoise in the papers, and then some coral colors. And I had initially laid them all on there, and I thought I would punch them all at once, like all the holes, and then I realized that was probably pretty silly because there was no way of remembering which buttons went with which holes. So what I do is I lay one down, punch the holes, sew it on, and then lay the next one down, punch the holes, sew it on, and keep going until it was all full. And now that it's finished, I'm just putting a couple bits of washi tape on the back to keep the threads in place, and then a whole lot of adhesive because this is getting fairly heavy and bulky, and I want to make sure it stays stuck to my card. And once it's down, I see a lot of white cardstock still that's kind of bugging me a bit, and I have an idea to add some of these little gems to just sort of fill in a lot of the gaps. So that's what I do. And the image that is stamped on that orange flag is the thanks image, and I like how the round key type of the thanks stamp is mimicked by that turquoise paper, which is the key turquoise paper. And then I stamped it once, and then just underneath it kept stamping it but not re-inking it, so you get this faded effect. Okay, and now on to my last card, and this is my last piece of large paper, and I have made sure to save it, so it is cut to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and I'm going through all my scraps at this point, because like I said, this is my last piece of almost full-size paper. Everything else is scraps of varying sizes and shapes. So that large strip of turquoise is sort of the next biggest piece, and then I decide to accent it with the stripe pattern and give that an edge with a border punch. So that's going to go behind the turquoise, but it needs something behind it again, because it will get a little bit lost on that pattern paper in the background. So I find this scrap of the dark brown, and I decide that that's going to be where my sentiment goes. And I get a happy birthday sentiment, and I'm going to emboss it with white, because that's basically the only way to get anything visible on there, is to have it embossed in white. And there must have been something on the stamp itself. I don't know if I used a baby wipe to clean it the last time I cleaned it or something, but there was a little bit between the A and the Y at the end of the stamp that didn't stamp cleanly, basically. So I just kind of tried to scrape the embossing powder out that shouldn't have been there, and then emboss it. And it's fine. It's a little bit messy, but it's okay. So you can see when you add that dark brown behind the border strip how it pops. One of the problems, I guess, or the challenges I have when using a stamp set that is so specific as this one is making cards that I know that I will be able to send to people, or that people will buy, because ultimately I sell these cards. So bringing in these stamps like the happy birthday stamp is really important to me to extend the life of the kits. But I do like that this particular kit had that thanks stamp in it, because I can always use more thank you cards. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much. I am going to post one last video, which is just showing everything that's left, and that'll be it for this kit, and I can move on. Thanks so much. If you like this, give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Okay guys, bye.